Hello, my name is Clayton Shaddocks, and I run Survival Training Oregon. You can go find me at survivaltrainingoregon.com. Today, I'm going to teach a class on edible plants that are common in the western United States, and specifically in the western Pacific Northwest. The first thing we have here is fireweed. Fireweed is extremely common weed, and I believe it got its name because it's very prolific in post-fire burns. And also, I've also heard rumor that in the summer, as you'll see, it grows a reddish, purplish flower stalk that comes up here, and that people have also been said to think that it looks like the forests are on fire. Fireweed is a great edible plant because you can eat it as a salad or as a pot herb, and you can cook the stalks into whatever soups or stews or anything like that. It makes a good general purpose round out for any stews and soups. Fireweed is easily identifiable by, on the long spear-like leaves, you have your center vein, and then I don't know if you can zoom in on this, but you have loops of outer veins that join together and almost make an outer vein on the edges of the leaf. This makes it distinguishable from a lot of the other. There are many other weeds that grow in a similar pattern to this, but that's how you can identify fireweed from all the other, is you look for the loops of outer veins that join together on the edge and have secondary outer vein. Palatability, it's pretty good. It's got a little bit of bitterness, which if you cook it, that helps to reduce a lot of the bitterness. But again, this is one of those plants that you can eat both cooked and raw. Just throw it into a salad. I do it all the time, where I'll just take a plant like this, pluck off all the leaves, mix it into a salad. Here's a young fireweed. And then like most plants, when it's young like this, really soft, really tender, much more palatable. Great for salads when it's like that. It hasn't quite developed its bitterness yet. All right, the next plant I'm going to show you, Bracken Fern. Bracken Fern is very common all across the United States. When it's at this stage, you don't really want to eat it. Unfortunately, we're a little late in the season for me to show you the true edible part of the Bracken Fern, but people have heard of fiddleheads, and what happens is, as the fern family begins to grow, the young shoots or the young leaves wrapped up real tight, almost like the head of a fiddle or cello or any of those type of string instruments. That's when they're edible, as they're rolled up really tight, and they're a nice, soft, you can pluck them off and eat them as they are. The natives and Asians, because this is a very prolific plant, it's all across the world, will roast the fiddleheads. And one of the things with Bracken Fern and the fern families is they're both an edible and a toxic plant. Too much Bracken Fern has an effect on thiamine levels in the body, and it'll deplete your thiamine levels and take the B vitamins out. And so if you eat a lot of Bracken Fern fiddleheads, there have been poisonings of livestock. No known poisonings of human beings yet, but it does reduce thiamine levels, so it's kind of one of those plants that if you look through plant books, it lists it both as an edible plant and as a poisonous plant. But the Asians and the natives used to roast the fiddleheads, and the thought with that, and there may be some scientific evidence to it, is the roasting helps remove some of those acids that deplete the body of thiamine. So it's an edible plant, but it's not on the top list of go out and forage and find a bunch of this stuff, but it is an option if you need to find an edible plant. All right, the next one is one of my favorites, is the common cattail. You find these in standing water or along stream beds and ponds and whatnot all over the United States. And it is a great plant because it's got a lot of uses. Right now, we're into the late spring, early summer time frame where they're almost starting to turn into your common corn dog looking cattails that you see. Cattail provides a bunch of different food sources, and I have a little baggie here, and this is the pollen that we're just getting out of the season for producing. But this pollen comes out of this flowery section. And the pollen comes out when we're in the late spring, early summer time frame, and the cattails are starting to look like this. You have this little flowery section at the top of the stalk. And this pollen, like I say, is a very, very fine talcum powdery-ish. It makes it a little challenging to harvest because usually what you'll do is you'll take a bag and then you'll just walk along the cattail grove And then what I'll do is I'll just take the head and shake it in there. And you'll lose a lot because it's so powdery it'll float away. But after a bit of time of just going from cattail to cattail head, you can, I had the bottom of this bag filled up. And I've used most of it, but this can show you how it's just a really bright, really powdery flower. What you do is you gather as much of that flour as possible, and then you can mix it just like regular flour. And there's a lot of people make what they call cattail pancakes. I don't really call them cattail pancakes because they don't cook like your standard pancake. They kind of make a cookie-ish material on the bottom of the pan, but it's still real soft and powdery. The pollen's almost a little hydrophobic, so when you mix the water in, it's really hard to mix the water, and then even then it doesn't coagulate together. So what I do is I mix it with common serviceberry. This is another really, really prolific plant all across the West. The berries look almost identical to blueberries. They have that same kind of light bluish, kind of powdery substance on the outside, and then you have your standard berry looking with a little bit of the red juice inside. Serviceberries, little tiny berries, small leaves, pretty easy to identify from other berry plants. But like I say, all of these blueberry type bushes that you find in the Pacific Northwest, Oregon, Washington, Northern California, Idaho, and whatnot, blueberry, huckleberry, serviceberry, they're almost all the same. Even Oregon grape and blue elderberry. But what I like to do, like I say, is mix the pollen of the cattail with the serviceberries, and I'll mix them all up and I'll make a little paste, and then that makes the pancake cookie cook and hold together better, or you can just make a paste and leave it as a paste and eat it just like that. And that sweetens it up a little bit because the taste of both the cattail and the cattail pollen is almost kind of like an artichoke-y type flavor. So as an artichoke cookie doesn't really, not high on people's palate. Another part of the cattail in the late spring, early summer that's edible is when it's in this phase, before the corn dog section starts to appear and before this flowery section, this area that's going to turn into your pollen-bearing flower, you can cut it off, break it off, and you get this, and you can cook this and eat it just like corn on the cob. Again, it's got that artichoke flavor. Takes quite a few of these to fill you up, but it's a great food source. Another wonderful thing about cattail. Then, as we continue down the cattail is great for cordage, for making baskets and matting for bedding and whatnot. Get down to the bottom of the cattail, and the cattail roots, or rhizomes actually for cattail, you can pull them all apart, cook them, and basically eat them like a starchy spaghetti noodle. But you've got to be careful with cattail because you've got to make sure that the water source is fairly clean. Even though cattails grow in stagnant water, you're going to get various pollutants in the water. If you even think that there's any kind of sewage runoff or chemical contaminants from old car batteries, junkyard stuff like that, those type of really toxic chemical pollutants, you don't want to mess with it because these rhizomes and roots will soak up those same contaminants. Even though the water may seem okay, you look around in the area that stagnant water is. But again, you clean it off real good. The thicker root sources you can also roast up. And you can see here, you've got a thicker root source, and that white meaty area there you can cook up, roast it, eat it. Another part that's useful in the spring with the cattail is the inner part. And this area here you can cook up just like bamboo shoots in Asian food, like a lot of traditional Chinese food and whatnot, will supplement with bamboo shoots. This white area here is actually pretty good. Now, the further you come up to the stalk and the more it starts picking up a green color, the harder, more fibrous it is and harder to eat. But down here in the white section, it's actually pretty good. And all you can do is stir fry, throw it in with whatever you're cooking, or eat it as is. So cattail is a great plant. If you can find an area with cattail, you're really one up because there's a lot of useful parts of the cattail. Back to the serviceberry again. Once you learn to see serviceberry, right now serviceberry's in bloom. As you can see, I pulled this out of just right behind my house. And it's one of the earliest berries to start coming in. It takes a lot of these little berries to fill up, you know, a receptacle, but again, it's an early berry. You can start picking it early, get as many as you can, and what the natives used to do is dry it. And they would just make a paste, and then they'd put it on skunk cabbage leaf or something like that, and then either dry it near their fires or dry it in the sun, and make kind of like little fruit roll-ups, so to speak, but they make a pasty cookie kind of thing and dry it, and then they keep that wrapped up in a dry place, and it would help sustain them through the bad seasons in the winter and whatnot when things were less prolific. Another really, really common plant. Once you see and recognize this, you'll be amazed at how much you see of it. This is common chicory. And a lot of people may be familiar with chicory as a coffee substitute. The entire plant of chicory is edible, and it's of the dandelion species. Real distinguishable, these little light bluish, purplish starburst flowers. That distinguishes this plant from most all the others. It's one of the few that have this, or anything that even closely looks like this. Now, chicory, beyond just the root source as a coffee substitute, the whole plant is edible. The leaves of an older plant, especially as it starts getting into bloom, I really recommend cooking. You can eat them raw, but they don't taste very good, and it's kind of almost got a fuzzy texture on the back, which a lot of people have a hard time not stomaching, but considering palatable. But if you cook it, boil it down or steam it down like a spinach, it's actually pretty good. And then you have the rootstock, and I murdered this one, so to speak, because the roots are pretty heavy duty on this plant, and they go really deep, and they're a really stout root. And I ended up hacking it off just so I could get it out of the ground in a reasonable time frame. But all you got to do is shave off the hard exterior and get down to the meaty section. And again, it's a nice meaty section. You can roast it, dry it, and grind it into a coffee substitute. And of course, it doesn't have any caffeine, but some people consider it a similar coffee substitute. I know in the military they used to cut a lot of our coffee because chicory is so cheap, and it'd be about half normal Colombian bean coffee and half chicory. It's got a real distinctive earthy flavor, so you know if you're drinking chicory coffee, it is definitely chicory coffee. But even if you don't want to make a coffee substitute, you just roast them up like little potatoes or do a stir fry or whatnot, and chicory is a great food source, both leaves and root. And then you can also use the stems, again, as a pot herb. You know, chop them all up, dice them up, and put them into your stews and soups. Very prolific plant. You'll find this thing from early spring all the way through late fall, all over the place. Empty lots, roadside, open burns, logging areas, any place where it can get some sun on disturbed soil, it's all over the place. And then another extremely common plant that most people probably don't even know is edible is your common dandelion. Common dandelions were actually brought over by the Pilgrims as a stable food source in the New World. They weren't sure what they were going to find in the New World, or whether there was going to be any indigenous plants that would survive as well as the dandelion. And so they brought dandelions, and they introduced dandelions to this continent. As we all know, dandelions are a very prolific weed. They grow everywhere. They sprout up all over the place. And there's a lot of dandelion lookalikes that you got to be kind of wary of. Dandelion, true dandelion, has no branches. You'll notice the flower stalk comes straight down. The leaf stalks, straight leaf stalks. There's no branching. There's a lot of common dandelion lookalikes that have a similar flower and kind of similar leaf that people confuse as dandelion. True edible dandelion has no branching on it whatsoever. Now in dandelion, you can eat, the young leaves are great for salads. Little tiny bit of a bitterish flavor, kind of like leeks maybe, but again, very palatable, good salad. And then as they get older, like this plant, and they start to grow a flower, it's best to cook them. Steam them like spinach, or boil them like spinach. You can mix them with some of the other greens. Dandelion's a great one though, because you see it all over the place. And dandelion continues to grow all year long. So it's one of those. But again, you got to develop a taste for it. There's times that you pick an older plant and it's very bitter, and other times that you pick a younger plant, you're like, wow, I don't know, I put this in salad every day. And then the last substance I'm going to show you, it's not a plant per se, it's a lichen. And this is Usnea lichen. Usnea lichen is not edible, so You know, I'm bringing this up because it's a very useful plant for your outdoor enthusiasts, your survivalists, your campers, your backpackers, or whatnot. Usnea lichen has a fabulous antimicrobial property, which means that it inhibits microbe growth. And so you can use it as a wound dressing if you're out away from anything and you don't have proper antibiotics, you don't have proper, Band-Aids and first aid dressings. Usnea lichen is great to make a compress out of and put directly onto the wound. Now there's a lot of lichens that look similar to Usnea lichen. What you want to look for is you get your little stringy section and you start to pull it apart. I don't know if you can zoom in on this to see it well enough, but as you pull it apart, there's a little, and then this one's a little old so it's starting to dry out, but there's a string in the middle that looks kind of latexy and it's a little rubbery. So as you start to pull this light minty green skin off the center strands, you'll see this little tiny white, latex looking filament inside. That's how you know it's true Usnea lichen and not a lot of the other really common lichens. Another great source of fire tinder. If you're out, you grab some, and I do it all the time. As I'm walking along, if I see a piece of Usnea lichen growing on a tree or sitting on the ground, I'll just pick it up and put it in my pocket and let it dry by my body heat. And then it catches a spark real easy and it'll get, just keep blowing on it and it makes a great fire tinder. So Usnea lichen is one of those really useful little plant substances that you can find, keep track of. You see it, grab it, throw it in your pocket. If you get a big cut or an injury later, use it as a antimicrobial dressing, or if luck has it and you don't injure yourself, it makes a great fire tinder. And again, as a recap, we've got your common dandelion, prolific all over the United States, edible as both a salad, or you can cook it and make sort of similar to spinach. You have common chicory, again, very prolific all over the United States. Part of the dandelion family, so again, you can either eat it as a young, before it starts getting fibrous and gets fluffy, you can eat it as a salad, or you can cook it like spinach. The stalks make a great pot herb. Chop them up, dice them up, and put them into soups and stews. Next one is your common serviceberry. Early blooming berry, similar to a blueberry. Easy to find in late spring, early summer. We have the cattail. You have the edible cattail rhizomes that you can cook almost like a spaghetti. It's a high starchy, fibrous material that's good for a starch source. You have the cattail stalk itself down at the white end at the bottom is almost like a bamboo shoots in Chinese food. Dice it up or cook it up. You have at the top in the cattail head, you have the pollen-bearing flower, which again, you get this super fine yellowy pollen that you can mix into a flour substitute. And then you have the top, before the flower head gets to this level early in the spring, you have this level, which all you've got to do is cook it up like corn, steam it or boil it, and cook it, eat it just like corn. Next one, you have Bracken Fern. Again, Bracken Fern is one of those good guy, bad guy plants. Young fiddleheads is before the end of the stalks start to sprand out like this. In the early spring, they'll have really tight little fiddleheads. You can chop those up. I recommend roasting them. A lot of the natives roasted them to reduce some of the acids in it. And then you have common fireweed, very prolific plant. You find this all over the West in all elevations. They grow in places where they can get a lot of sun, such as old burns. Again, you want to look for, you have the main center vein, and then you have a real distinctive outer vein on each side where the loops of the veins come together and make secondary veins. That's how you can distinguish this from other plants. Again, a great pot herb, great salad, or put it in stews. And so these are very common plants that you can find all over the West that have some great edibility. Okay, this is mullein or mullein. Again, I don't know the exact proper pronunciation. It's a real common roadside plant, roadside bush or weed. And mullein is edible in the sense that it's not poisonous and you can eat it. But it's not palatable at all because it's got this real fuzzy, velvety texture on the leaves. So you can cook it and eat it. It's edible. But mullein is great because it is an awesome medicinal plant that helps loosen phlegm and open bronchial tubes. And the Native Americans use this as a medicine for asthma. And they would dry it and smoke the leaves or make a base fire and then put the leaves in it and inhale the smoke, and it clears up your bronchial tubes and opens your bronchial tubes, and it was great for asthmatics or treating bronchitis and colds that put a lot of mucus and phlegm and close up the bronchioles. And so mullion's a great little one. It's also got good, thick, strong leaves. And so the natives would use this almost as a bedding or sometimes as a glove material. If you're looking to harvest, like stinging nettle is another plant we'll go over to. Stinging nettle is a great edible plant, but it's got its natural defenses of the stings. And I don't know how many people have run into stinging nettles, but when you hit stinging nettle, you know you've hit it. You can harvest stinging nettle with using the leaves of the mullein as a glove, basically. So mullion's another great plant to know just because of its uses both as a medicine and as a tool. And you see these all over along the side of the road. Okay. Here we have Oxeye Daisy. Oxeye Daisy is another very common flower all around the West. It's got a real distinctive kind of sunflowerish look with the white petals and the little yellow face. Oxeye Daisy has very distinctive little leaves. And these little basal leaves that almost kind of look like an old dessert spoon that people may have in their china sets or, may have seen when they were kids. This leaf, perfectly edible as a plant stock, and it almost has a spicy kind of oregano-ish maybe flavor. Great for salads. You can cook it in to add flavor to soups and stews. You find Oxeye Daisy all over the place, and it's so common people wouldn't even think of it as an edible plant. Okay, next plant in our little array here is the common thistle. Thistle's another one of these plants, very prolific. You see them all over the place. You wouldn't even think it's edible. All you have to do is remove the prickly leaves and the thistles along the edge, and the inside of the material is edible. This one's a little young, so you don't see it yet, but there's none around it. This little flower, you'll recognize them all over the place. It develops this purpley little fuzzy head, the flower, real common thistle flower. Again, the flower is edible. So again, to eat it, all you got to do is remove the leaves, get down into the center part, and the meat or the fibrous material on the inside is edible. Cook it up into stews, soups, whatever you got. Following right into the next plant is clover. Common clover. Almost all clovers are edible. Clovers you find around here are all edible. Here we have actually a mix of red clover and white clover. Both leaves are edible. They're usually best for digestive purposes. If you either cook them or dry them, and you can make them into a tea. You can make the heads into a tea. Of the clover species, the red clover, which has the same shape head, but it's kind of a reddish purplish and a bigger head, is the most palatable. It's the sweetest. You almost have a honeyish flavor to them. But white clover is also edible. And again, you can make salads or make a soup out of the leaves. Better for digestive purposes if you cook it or let it dry. And then we go right into heelall, which is a real common little plant in the forests. It looks very similar to clover. You have a real distinctive leaf pattern where the leaves will grow in groups of two opposite each other, staggered up the stem. At these two, these two, these two, with a distinctive little purple flower. The whole plant's edible, either as a salad, or you can cook it. Not a bad flavor to it, little bit bitterish. But heelall has a lot of great medicinal properties in that it boosts the immune system, and that's why they've named it heelall. It also has an antimicrobial property. It's not as good as the usnea lichen, but you can use it. You can make a compress or make a tea that helps boost the immune system and kill a lot of microbes that may be in wounds or infections. And then we have another group of heelall that again isn't camouflaged in with the clover, and it's that same, it's got the alternating leaves that come off the stalk. You got a pair, alternates a pair, and then alternates, and then here you have a much more mature version of the flower. Again, the whole plant is edible and has great medicinal, hence the name heelall. It helps boost the immune system and can be used to treat infections and by making a tea or a compress for wound dressing. This kind of shows you the flower stalk that comes up. Common plantain, you see these all over the place. Again, it's a really common weed. You step on it all the way, or all the time. thinking that it's a nuisance weed. Plantain is great for two reasons, both edibility and as a fiber source for making cordage and rope. This is the broadleaf plantain. Hopefully a little later we'll find a common narrowleaf plantain. Almost the same plant, same edibility, same uses and everything. Really common plant. You see them all over the place. Big broadleaf, real heavy veins in the leaf, and it's almost kind of got a thick, leathery, rubbery consistency to it. Real good cooked up like spinach. Not so good because it's such a tough, fibery plant. Not really good as a salad. I mean, it's edible as a salad, but not palatable as a salad. But once it's cooked up, it's great. And what I like to do is you get these stringy little veins that come all the way down. As you pull them, as you pull the plant, these little stringy veins are common. You just peel them out and then keep them. And go through and find a couple more. And before I cook them and eat them, I'll harvest the string, and it makes a great strong cordage, either for lashing things together, for making fishing line, and all you got to do is braid it together. It's kind of hard to do, but you twist it together, braid it, get more pieces of it, twist it together, braid it, tie it off at the end, and this is a real strong cord. And it's a great source for making cordage, fishing line, working line, anything like that, for making shelters or tools. And so plantain's another one of my favorite plants because it's real common, great edibility, and great use as a tool. Yellow dock, curly dock, real common weed. I find them all over the place. Part of the dock family with these big, broad leaves and long, tall, branching with these little grainy flowers. This is one of those that is edible but in moderation, and it recommends that you cook the leaf like spinach, but it's recommended that you cook it in 2 changes of water, or at least in a change of water, 2 different cookings. Cook it, throw out the water, cook it again, and then it's edible, because this is another one of those with high oxalic acid that too much of it can start shutting down your kidneys. But it's still edible, but again in moderation. It's a real prolific plant. You find it all over the place, but if you are going to put it into your diet or in a survival diet, you just want to go in moderation. And cook it just like a spinach, change the water once, cook it again, and then it's edible. Okay. This is Bain Berry, and this is one to know because it is poisonous. It is not edible in any way, shape, or form. Bain Berry has these kind of strawberry looking leaves, and so it could possibly in a younger stage be confused as strawberry until you get to the berries. Now these berries aren't ripe yet. The ripened berries turn red. They're a dark reddish, but it's a very distinctive berry because it has this almost bug eye looking, each individual berry is on its own little stalk out from the stem. This will cause cardiac arrest. You do not want to eat Bain Berry. So don't confuse it with any other berry. It's pretty easy to recognize it from anything else, but one that I want to show you because I don't want anybody to get confused by it. False Solomon seal is another real common forest plant. In fact, the critters have already gotten to these. You have the berries of the false Solomon seal grow at the end on these little groups. False Solomon seal, the plant itself is edible, but not very good and should be cooked. Just to break it down so it's easy to digest, but the berries are also edible. Real common. The thing with false Solomon seal is you want to make sure that the leaf stalk, as it joins the stalk, doesn't wrap around it in any way. There are other plants in the same family, and one is the false hellebore. And the false hellebore, when young, kind of looks like false Solomon seal. But the thing to remember with false hellebore is the base of the leaf grows around, almost completely wraps around the stalk. False hellebore is very poisonous. False Solomon seal, which is a similar looking plant, but you have these alternating leaves that crisscross on their way up and do not wrap. When they grow straight out of the stem. False Solomon seal, berries are edible and the leaves are edible. But you want to make sure when you're identifying this plant that the leaves are growing straight from the stalk at a central point and not wrapping around the stalk coming out. Sword fern, very common Pacific Northwest plant. It's edible in the sense that it won't kill you. It's not poisonous, but it's not a good food source. And the Native Americans actually considered it a starvation food. They only ate it at a last resort when they had nothing else to eat. And what they would do is the inner parts of the shoot or the rhizomes rootstock, they would clean them and roast them and eat them. But it's not a real good food source. There's not a lot of calories in it. There's not a lot of vitamins. And it doesn't taste good at all. But in a starvation factor, if there's absolutely nothing else, it is a possibility to eat. Stinging nettle is another great plant for dual purpose. The leaves are great as a spinach. Cook them up. The little hairs on the stinging nettle are what sting you. And what you want to do is you can either dry it and then rehydrate the leaves and eat them, or you can cook them just like spinach, and the leaves will fall off either by the drying method or by the boiling method, and then the leaves are edible. Stinging nettle's great because it's got a heavy fibrous outer skin, so to speak, and that skin, in fact, I've still got the mullein leaf that we can use as a glove. And so you just pull the leaves off and eat the leaves, or this skin, as you pull it off, makes another great cordage material. Just pull long strands of it, pull the leaves off, pull the flowers off, and then just weave it together or spin it together, however you do, and make a great strong cordage out of it. I mean, you can see how strong that is for fishing line. And again, that mullein leaf from earlier makes a great little tool for getting a hold of it and not getting stung. Real common high nitrogen soils.
So you want to cook this first?
Yes, absolutely. You definitely don't want to eat that raw because your tongue will not like you for it. This is candy leaf. Real common in high nitrogen, wet soils, forest floors, especially in the Pacific Northwest coastal forests where it's nice and wet. You've got this distinctive little white flower and then these funny alternating leaves. It's a small ground cover type plant, and again, you can eat it just like a salad. Kind of a little bit of a bitter, but flower, the whole thing, completely edible. And you might be able to zoom in. There's one good intact berry back in there in the back. But this is common salmonberry.
Salmonberry.
Yep.
Right.
Salmonberry.
Nothing much to say about that. It's edible.
This is your common holly-leaf Dorgan grape. The plant itself isn't edible, but it will grow little blueberries that, again, similar to blueberries, similar to elderberries, similar to the serviceberry, huckleberry, another edible berry. Not the greatest flavor, but Oregon grape is another great source of berry. Oregon grape also has more medicine value, similar to the Usnea lichen. It's got an antimicrobial property, and down in the roots, the root has kind of a yellowish tinge to it, and the natives actually use it as a yellow dye. But the roots you can also use to make a compress or a dressing for wound dressing, because it's antimicrobial. It will inhibit germs and infection from growing on a wound. So Oregon grape is another great plant to know, both for food value from the berries and medicinal value from the inner bark. Chicory, the dandelion, the plantain, your yellow dock, your burdock, all of these common weeds, once you learn to recognize them, they're everywhere. And you're like, wow, that's edible, I can eat that. Hey, if I get into a bad way, I can eat that and that. There's all of these different food sources that you find all over the area. And the more you learn them, the more you learn to recognize them, you're tripping over them constantly. And that's great about this area because there's so much edible wildlife and plant life.
Do you think that people that are vegans or vegetarians that have a focus on just eating vegetables, if they had to exist out here, or plants, that's a little unrealistic?
I don't know about that per se, because I would hope that some of the vegans and the naturalists, vegetarians and whatnot, would know maybe more than me, because I'm a basic survivalist. I know a lot of edible plants and materials, and there may be more that I don't know. I'm sure there is. I don't claim to be an expert that know all of it. But you're still going to need your fat sources. Your human body needs some type of fat. And there's less natural nuts. There's less things like tofu and things that a lot of the vegans and the vegetarians will supplement their diet with to get those natural materials that we get from meat. In the Pacific Northwest, I don't know of a lot of plants that will provide that same thing unless they go to bugs. If they don't have a problem eating bugs, if they consider that different, then there's a lot of your grubs and your ants and whatnot like that you can supplement your diet, and you can get a lot of the fats and the complex proteins that you can't get from plants. But again, that depends on how they, what they term, where they draw the line between animal matter and plant matter. And this is a nasty, nasty little plant that is actually edible in early stages.
Okay, this is called what?
Devil's Club. Easy to remember because you've got this stalk, the club, with all of these gnarly little spikes on it. And Devil's Club's pretty mean because you've got spikes on the tops of the leaves as well as the bottom. This is just one mean plant. But Devil's Club is also on the edible list because early in life, as they first start to sprout and they come up, you've got almost an asparagus-looking head. And before all these spikes on the top and on the stem get hard, you can cook it and eat it kind of like asparagus. But very young plant. As they, like I say, as its defenses start hardening, this thing will tear you up pretty good. But early in its life, as it first starts to bud up, it's still edible. There's a real common misnomer. You'll hear people all the time say, if the water is clear and running fast, it's drinkable. That is not a universal safety precaution. Here we have a great example of a common Northwest stream. Fast-flowing, clear, rocky soil. A lot of people have a common misnomer that this would be safe water. And it may be safe water, but just because it is clear, cold, fast-moving water does not mean that it is going to be a safe drinking, uncontaminated water source. Giardia, or Giardia, depending on how you want to pronounce it, can live in any water source. Common beaver fever is what it's called. And it is a microscopic organism that is very stout, lives in all kinds of different climates, and is transmitted through animal feces, beaver, bird, whatever. So it can easily live or lie dormant in a cool, fast-running stream source. As a kid, before I started learning about beaver fever, I used to drink out of these all the time, and the water tastes fabulous. It's some of the best water you'll drink. But I was playing Russian roulette. And so now, with more training that I've had over the years, I know that this is not necessarily a universally safe stream. Even a cool, clear, fast-moving stream needs to be purified. Whether you boil the water, whether you use an iodine-based water purification tablet, or whether you use bleach or a hiking filter that has, a 0.0 microbial filter. Usually when I'm out, I use my filter. Another great source, though, is I have a little eyedropper that I've filled with your standard chlorine bleach, just like your standard laundry chlorine bleach. And you can easily purify any water source with a couple of drops. And the formula that you use is you want to use 2 to 3 drops per quart of water. And so if you've got your 1-quart canteen or your Nalgene bottle, you can easily come down, fill it up, and then just with your, like I say, I have an old eyedropper that I use, and it's your standard chlorine bleach. You don't want to use your Clorox Advantage with the thickeners in it. You don't want to use a lot of your perfumed or your Mountain Fresh bleach, or just your standard, regular, everyday chlorine bleach. Put it in a little eyedropper. Fill your Nalgene bottle or your canteen or whatever your water source is, straight out of the stream. Put, like I say, 2 to 3 drops per quart. Just count of 1, 2, 3. Shake it up. and then you want to let that bleach do its action, killing all the microorganisms in the water for approximately 20 minutes to a half hour. I usually go half hour to be safe, shake it up and let that water sit, put it back on my belt, put it back in my backpack, and let it cure. And then it's the same thing as most city waters are doing. They chlorinate the water that comes from the reservoir, whether it's the Bull Run Reservoir, whether it's Hag Lake, wherever your water resource is. That's what the city's doing. They're filtering it and then they're chlorinating it. And so a real simple, inexpensive, and good shelf life method of water purification. Get yourself a little eyedropper bottle. Make sure that you don't confuse it with your regular eye drops, because you definitely don't want to put chlorine bleach in your eye. But it works great for purifying your water source. If you're in a survival situation and you don't have your water purification system with you, the next best thing to do is boil your water. Find some container. Unfortunately, in the world we live in, there's trash everywhere. You can find an old beer can, an old water bottle that's been discarded somewhere. Find that, keep it, rinse it out, wash it, and use that to boil your water. And a common theory is at least 5 minutes. That may be difficult to do if you don't have a proper lid, but you want to get a good rapid solid boil. Not a couple of bubbles, but a good rapid boil. I would say for at least 2 to 5 minutes. And that way you know you're killing everything, let it cool, and then your water's drinkable. But like I say, one of my favorite methods, other than your commercial water purification tablets, is just an eyedropper with standard chlorine bleach. Wood nettle. Very similar to the stinging nettle, but as you can see, I'm manhandling it with bare hands.
These are called what again?
Hedge nettle or wood nettle. Same nettle family, but they don't have the stinging property that the stinging nettle has. Can be identified by its nice, fat, kind of oval, heart-shaped leaf, as opposed to the stinging nettle, which has got a darker leaf with a much more jagged, geometric shape. And then hedge nettle grows these little purplish flowers, whereas the stinging nettle had those kind of little grainy flower pods coming off. Again, edible. Eat it just like the stinging nettle. Cook up the leaf. It's kind of got a fuzzy texture to it, so really not good for a salad per se, but once you cook it up, eat it just like spinach, another great source of wild food.
When you say cooking up leaves, cooking up plants,
Uh-huh.
are you mostly talking about boiling them?
Yes, boiling or steaming them, whatever you have the option to do. Roasting them, especially with plants, is going to be a lot harder to do and still maintain the plant integrity. But if you've got some cooking source or some way to steam them, they're great steamed. They work great either boiled or steamed.
About how long?
Oh, it's just a couple of minutes. It doesn't take long at all, especially with these.
You definitely don't want to overcook them.
No, I mean, they'll start breaking up, and you'll start burning them, or they'll start turning to soup. But you just steam them or throw them in your boiling pot or your little cup or your canteen cup, whatever you've got to cook with, for, get it up to a boil and put them in there for maybe a minute. Doesn't take long at all to boil them. Millipedes, and they're all over the place right now. There's another common misnomer I've heard people tell me that have had pseudo survival training. If it crawls, you can eat it. That is very false. Most of Mother Nature has a great way of warning us with, take the poison dart frog for example. Most animals that have bright fluorescent markings, bright warnings, bees have the yellow and black. Poison dart frogs, of course, have all the arrays of colors. Think of that when you're trying to determine whether or not you want to eat an animal that you're unfamiliar with. These little yellow spotted millipedes, at first you look at them, they're like, oh, they're black, they must be edible. But you want to look, they stick out because they have these bright yellow spots. That's nature's way of warning us. Yellow spotted millipedes secrete hydrogen cyanide. So, of course, cyanide, is poison. You don't want to eat millipedes. That's a great example to show you where, if you're not really think, oh, it's a nice little black bug. I can cook it up, I can eat it as is. You want to stay, anything that's got those warning colors.
Cyanide is a part of their body?
Yeah, hydrogen cyanide is a defense mechanism. When you pick them up, they'll squirt it out. They'll kind of spit a little hydrogen cyanide out of these glands on their sides, and so you definitely don't want to eat them. Even if you cook them, it's still not going to do anything for you. You don't want to mess with them.
The stuff that we see on TV with survivalism,
right.
How accurate do you think some of that stuff is compared to the stuff that you've learned?
Right, some of it is accurate. They do teach a lot of good stuff, but the thing to remember with TV is television is about viewership, is about marketing and getting people to watch something. So a lot of times the things you see on TV are very sensationalized. They may take a real survival type situation and they'll drum it up, or they'll edit it, or the host of the show may do something that's more dangerous than the average person should ever do in a survival situation because they're putting themselves at risk. Now, in the controlled environment of the television show, that's okay because there is a medic team standing by, or you can get a helicopter in to get him out. But you alone, lost in the woods, never take a risk that you don't need to take, because that's part of survivalism, is you want to survive. Don't do anything dangerous. Some of these shows, they intentionally do things that might be dangerous or sensational to get viewership. People want to watch that. They want to see the host do this dangerous thing or eat this crazy item. You know, it makes good TV. But in the real world, I don't recommend that at all. And I don't teach that. I teach a much more conservative survival so that you get out, so that you survive and you get to rescue, or search and rescue finds you. They'll ask me, oh yeah, did you see that episode of that show? And I'm like, yeah, I saw that, and this scene was good and this scene was good, but this scene was dangerous. There's no way you would do that in the real world. I teach be prepared. Kind of the whole Boy Scout motto of you never really know what you're going to get into or where you're going to go, or that you don't plan on getting lost or being hurt in the woods, but if it happens, you need to be prepared for it. And so what I teach is if you know you're going to go hiking, camping, backpacking, exploring, whatever it is, bring a little belt pouch or a day pack or a little pocket survival kit. So if you do get into a bad situation, you're prepared for it. Right now in the summer, spring, fall, there's a lot of edible materials. Once you get into the dead of winter, even if there's not snow cover, a lot of the edible materials are much, much harder to find, or they've already gone dormant for the winter. So bring, if you're going to be out in the woods, bring a couple extra power bars or granola bars or some food source, because you're not going to be able to live off the land as easily as you would during spring, summer, fall. You got to take a lesson from the natives who lived in this area for centuries. They would store food. They would dry berries, they would dry and smoke meat, because they know in the winter months they're not just going to be able to walk out into the great forest supermarket that there is and harvest and forage for food. They've got to store their own food. So in the modern world, we also have to do that. And so if you are going to be ice climbing, snowboarding, cross-country skiing, snowshoeing, or just exploring in the winter months, make sure that you bring food and bring extra food. If you're only planning to go out for a day, you think 2 granola bars, that'll be fine if I skip lunch. But if you end up breaking your leg or you get lost and you're stuck out there, those 2 granola bars are going to be gone in no time, and you're not going to have the calories that you need to try to stave off hypothermia and keep your body warm. So plan worst case scenario, be prepared. If you do have to spend a couple of nights out there, bring some dehydrated food, bring some extra beef jerky, bring some more power bars, bring enough food that you're not carrying too much weight that it hampers your ability to go have fun in your recreational idea, but you are prepared that if you are stuck out there, you can feed yourself even if you can't find natural foods to eat. You should never go anywhere without a whistle. A whistle is one of those great, simple little pocket survival tools that can help you get rescued and help people find you no matter what the situation. If you get hurt, if you get tired, if you're dehydrated, if you're injured, if you're starving, you're cold, you're starting to go into hypothermia, your voice isn't going to carry as much as you think. So calling for help, you may never be found. But a whistle, give it 3 toots, the universal sign of distress, like SOS, they'll find you. And a whistle carries much further than your voice in inclement weather and wind. So I always recommend everybody, no matter what, carry a whistle. If you're taking your kids out into the woods for the first time, give them whistles and make sure that they always carry whistles with them. I always, no matter where I go, whatever I'm doing, if I'm outside, I've got a whistle on me. Survival is kind of one of those things that I've always been big into it. As a kid, I remember as far back as like 10, 12 years old, going down to the library, checking out books, going out and practicing in the backyard, trying to learn plants on my own. And there's a lot to be said for self-education. Some people are really good at that. They can pick up books and they can teach themselves. But a lot of people it doesn't work for. And the military was good for me because it gave me a lot of hands-on and gave me more practical experience. And I had swamp training, I had mountain training, I had desert training, I had jungle training. It brought me to those different environments and I got more hands-on practice. And then after my military career, I got back into it just because I'm an avid outdoors person. I camp, I backpack, I hunt, I do a lot of things in the outdoors. And following with my simple principle of always be prepared, I had that other education, but a lot of the guys that I would go backpacking with or go camping with and hunting and whatnot, I realized that I took for granted a lot of the information that I knew and kind of figured, well, I'm not that smart. I taught myself. Everybody else must know this stuff too. And all of my recreational buddies were all, hey, can you show me how to do this? Or, how do you know that? And so I started doing a lot of teaching of them. Oh, okay, this is how you find this. This is how you make this. This is what you would do in this situation. And I realized that there's more of a demand for that. There's a lot of people that they may have spent their whole life going camping on the weekends with mom and dad as a kid, or, they're getting into going fishing, or they're going mountain biking, and they're into snow sports. And they really don't know how to handle an emergency and how to live off the land and to keep themselves safe and healthy until they can either self-rescue or until they can get rescued. And so I decided that I wanted to do something that could help people with what I know how to do. And so I opened Survival Training Oregon, and it's given me an opportunity to teach regular, average, everyday people. You don't have to be some hardcore outdoor adventurist, some hardcore survivalist, or some extreme sports enthusiast. Just your average, everyday, whether it's your suburban soccer mom or whether it's your regular old guy that wants to go fishing, and he wants to leave the trail and step off down a fishing hole that he's never been to before. But he's thinking, well, if I trip and fall and sprain my ankle and I get stuck out there, what am I going to do? The purpose of Survival Training Oregon is that I can give people the hands-on practice and an education in 1 or 2 days, depending on the course that they sign up for, to actually be self-sufficient and to take care of themselves and to survive in an emergency situation so that they can either effect self-rescue, they can get back to their vehicle, get out of the situation, or stay safe and help search and rescue find them so that they can be rescued. And that's the whole purpose of Survival Training Oregon, is to give average, everyday people tools, education, and resources in their mind so that they can survive in an emergency.